name is Eliza Siddiqui. These are my notes. The topic that I'm going to be talking to you about today is something that is very important to me as a daughter of immigrants and a big history nerd. I've been living and studying in the United Kingdom for almost a year now, and by taking classes here, I have learned a lot about the history of a country that I wasn't as aware of. One of the stories that really stuck to me was one about the Windrush generation and the Windrush scandal, which is what I will be talking to you about today. Imagine living in a country for more than 50 years, paying taxes, raising a family, and contributing to your community, only to suddenly be told that you don't belong there anymore. This is what happened to thousands of people in Britain during what became known as the Windrush scandal. Although the Windrush generation helped rebuild Britain after World War II, changes in immigration policies caused many legal residents to be wrongly classified as undocumented immigrants, leading to what is known as the Windrush scandal. Today I will be discussing who the Windrush generation were, how the scandal happened, and why it still matters and is relevant today. To begin, it is very important to understand who the Windrush generation were and why they came to Britain in the first place. According to the National Archives educational resource, the Empire Windrush, which was the boat that brought migrants to Britain, arrived on June 22nd, 1948, carrying passengers from the Caribbean. After World War II, Britain faced big labor shortages and needed workers to help rebuild the country. Many Caribbean migrants answered to that call and came to the country looking for work and new opportunities for themselves and their families. These migrants arrived as citizens of the United Kingdom and colonies, meaning they had the legal right to live and work in Britain. In a 2018 article published by the Global Citizenship Observatory, which is an organization that studies citizenship and migration, researchers explained that people from Britain's former colonies were legally entitled to live and work in the United Kingdom. Many members of the Windrush generation went on to make important contributions to British society. In his 2020 article, Guy Hewitt, who served as Barbados's High Commissioner during this controversy, claims that the Caribbean migrants who came and worked in Britain worked for the transportation services, public service, the NHS, which is the National Health Service, and many more public services and essential jobs that helped support Britain's post-war recovery. They were very essential workers. They built careers, raised families, and became permanent members and accepted in British society. For many of them, Britain was the only home they really knew. Some had arrived as children and spent most of their lives there. However, despite living legally in Britain for decades, immigration policies introduced many years ago started to create very unexpected problems. In 2012, the British government introduced what became known as the Hostile Environment Policy. The goal of this policy was to make life more difficult for people living in Britain illegally. A major part of this effort was the Immigration Act of 2014. Under this law, employers, landlords, banks, and some other public services were required to check immigration status before providing jobs, housing, or other services. At first, this may sound very reasonable, but the problem was that many members of the Windrush generation arrived during a time when extensive immigration documentation was not required. In a 2022 article, published in an academic journal by Mike Slavin, who is a lecturer in politics at the University of Lincoln, he explains that many people who arrived during the 1950s and 60s entered Britain under a much more restrictive immigration system. Because of this, they might have never even received documentation, and if they did, they might not have kept it, thinking that it wasn't important. When immigration checks became way more stricter in the 21st century, thousands of people suddenly found themselves unable to prove they had the legal right to remain in Britain, even though they had just lived there for decades and contributed so much to society. Hewitt also explains in his 2020 article that many members of the Windrush generation were wrongfully treated as undocumented immigrants. They were asked to provide records which had sometimes been impossible to obtain. Government records have even been lost or destroyed, especially decades later and after a war. These policies created serious consequences for people who had spent most of their lives in Britain. Many members of the Windrush generation lost jobs because they could not prove their immigration status. Others lost access to health care, pensions, and government benefits that they needed. Hewitt reports in his 2020 article that some individuals were even detained in immigration centers, while others were deported to countries they barely remembered since they had been living in Britain for decades. Imagine being sent to a country you left just as a child after spending decades building a life somewhere else. It sounds so scary. As news of these cases became public, there was widespread outrage across Britain. Many people believed the government had treated all these legal residents unfairly, and protests began. In response, the British government issued very formal apologies and established a compensation scheme for those who had suffered because of the scandal. The government also created Windrush Day, which was on June 22nd, the day that they had arrived originally, for those observing, and recognized the contribution of the Windrush generation. However, the effects of the scandal continue to be discussed today, just how I am. In a 2024 article published in the Political Quarterly, also by Mike Slavin, he argues that concern remains about whether immigration policies could create problems for other immigrant groups in the future. The scandal raised very broad questions about citizenship, documentation, and how governments verify if you are legal or illegal. As you can see, the Windrush scandal was not simply an immigration issue. It was a situation in which thousands of people who had legally lived in Britain for decades suddenly found themselves treated as outsiders and as though they did not belong. So today I discussed who the Windrush generation were, how the Windrush generation happened, and why the scandal continues to matter today. The Windrush generation built modern Britain and had every right to remain there. Government policies caused many of them to be treated as outsiders, and the Windrush scandal serves as an important reminder that immigration policies have real consequences for ordinary people, and that citizenship rights should be carefully protected. Thank you so much.